Now, I'm quite sure that Bolton believed that Iran would never agree to an IAEA inspection of conventional military facilities at this military base. In the end, it turned out the Iranians did, in fact, agree to let the IAEA inspect the facilities, any facilities that they wanted, any 5 facilities that they wanted to inspect at the Parchin military base in one of the 4 sectors. And they allowed them to do it twice in 2005. But I'm quite sure, as I said, that Bolton did not expect the Iranians to do that. So what he thought would happen was that it would be possible then either El-Baradei would demand this, the Iranians would turn it down, and then the Iranians could be accused of hiding the alleged facilities used to test nuclear weapons, or El-Baradei would refuse to do that, in which case he could try to get El-Baradei removed from his position, which is exactly what he was doing in late 2004. So this was the beginning, the first move by Bolton to try to lay the political groundwork for this propaganda line that Iran had a secret nuclear weapons program. And in the end, when El-Baradei refused to confront Iran in a couple of IAEA reports, he did not talk about the fact that the IAEA had asked to inspect Parchin but had not yet gotten an answer from Iran. But when that happened, Bolton then leaked the photographs to ABC News and generated the first major set of stories about this theme that an unnamed State Department official was accusing Iran of being suspected of having a nuclear weapons testing facility or facilities at Parchin. Now, while Bolton was doing that, something much more important was happening in Israel. And that was that the Israelis were preparing the evidence, which up to that time had been missing. They simply lacked the evidence to accuse Iran concretely of having a nuclear weapons program. And that was what the Israelis were working on in 2003 and 2004. And we know now the full story, well, not the full story, but enough of the story to be able to understand how this unfolded for the first time. In my book, I tell the story of how the documents which surfaced mysteriously in 2004, the so-called laptop documents, because they were said to have come directly from the laptop computer of a scientist who was a participant in this alleged Iranian nuclear weapons research project. These documents, we now know, were handed over to German intelligence by the Mujahideen Iqalq, MEK terrorist organization. The MEK, of course, had been accused of been listed as a terrorist organization by the United States State Department and by European countries because they had killed a number of American civilians and military personnel in Iran in the 1970s. They had blown up civilian gatherings, killed civilians in terrorist bombings, a series of terrorist bombings in Iran in the 1980s, and then had been used by the Saddam Hussein regime in the war against Iran by Iraq during the 1980s. So this was undoubtedly a terrorist organization which could not be regarded as in any way a reliable source of documentation on the Iranian nuclear program. And we know that the Bush administration neoconservatives kept the MEK provenance of these documents in terms of turning them over to Western intelligence from the non-neoconservative officials of the administration because Colin Powell made a public statement to reporters in November of 2004, in which he referred to information that came from these laptop documents, saying, we have information that Iran is working very hard, that was his term, very hard to mate the Shahab-3 missile with a weapon, by which, of course, he meant a nuclear weapon. And in my book, I tell the story which was told to me by senior former German Foreign Office official Carsten Voigt, who was in charge of coordination of German-American relations, who was informed immediately after Powell's remarks by the senior officials of the German intelligence agency that they were extremely concerned about Powell's remarks. He said they told him that they knew all about these documents that had been referred to indirectly by Powell because they had gotten those documents from a member of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq a few weeks earlier. They ultimately had passed them on, of course, to the CIA. But the BND officials told him that they judged that source to be doubtful. And they were concerned now that Powell was basically relying on those documents that they believed were doubtful to make U.S. policy. Now, if this sounds vaguely familiar to you, it may be because you remember the curveball affair. That, of course, also involved intelligence which came from a source of the German intelligence agency, BND, an Iraqi who was given the codename Curveball, who told wild tales of Iraqi bioweapons labs, mobile bioweapons labs, which were then passed on to the CIA, and which ultimately became the centerpiece of Colin Powell's United Nations speech in February 2003. So, understandably, senior officials of the German intelligence agency were afraid that history was going to repeat itself, and that the Bush administration intended to use this information to build a case against Iran, just as it had built a case against Iraq on WMD grounds as the basis for making war against Iran. Well, as Mark Twain said, history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And this was indeed a major rhyme in U.S. policy and in Israeli policy. And here's the punchline of this story. The MEK itself was not capable of producing those documents. The documents were extremely sophisticated. They wove around actual people, actual events, and actual documents, a narrative that, of course, made the point that they wanted to make, that Iran had a nuclear weapons program, a secret nuclear weapons program. But there are contradictions if you examine them carefully enough. There are contradictions that give away the fact that they're not authentic, which I won't go into now. But the point I want to make is that the documents clearly were manufactured, fabricated by an ally of the MEK, not the MEK itself. And that ally could only have been Israel. The MEK, of course, we know, had extremely close relations with the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad. And so this is really a story about the way in which Israel played the central role in manufacturing the key evidence that was used by the Bush administration, passed on to the IAEA, then became the major source of evidence on which to condemn Iran from 2008 through 2012. Then the Israelis passed on more documents to the IAEA, which I again document in my book, which were used in a second major report, 2011, by the IAEA, which now is the gold standard, if you will, for the accusation against Iran for having had a nuclear weapons program. And just to conclude, I think the point that needs to be understood is that this is not just a matter of historical interest, because the Obama administration has now taken this evidence, both the laptop documents evidence and the later evidence that the Israelis turned over to the IAEA, and has demanded as part of its negotiating position in the nuclear talks with Iran that Iran must come clean, quote unquote, about the evidence that supposedly shows that it had worked with, experimented with nuclear weapons or had worked on nuclear weapons. This is extremely dangerous because, of course, the Iranians have no intention of coming clean because they understand that those documents were not authentic and that they've been accused on the basis of intelligence that was indeed manufactured. So essentially the Obama administration is setting up a demand which would cause the entire nuclear talks to fail. And then we would all be in the soup because we don't know what sort of dangers that will lead us to. So it's very important for people to understand that this manufactured crisis is now very much on the negotiating table. It's very much influencing the negotiations, and it's a very dangerous situation. So I hope that people will follow up on that point. Thank you.